Hello again. I am Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions at the Dryden Theater and the George Eastman Museum. We've got another streaming recommendation, this one coming from a community member. I'm very pleased to welcome Charles Benoit to the show. It's sort of a show. We've got recommendations for you online. Charles Benoit is an author, and he's also the saxophonist for Some Ske Band you may have heard of. So welcome, Charles.
I'm very honored to be here, and yeah, that's Some Ske Band, Rochester's best band with that name in town. So yeah, nobody else can make that claim. I'm also a writer. I'm very proud that I am the American correspondent for ReggaeSteadySka.com. It's an international website for all news ska, rocksteady, and reggae, and it's run out of Cologne, Germany. And I'm lucky enough to be their American writer.
Well, when I thought of you to bring you on to these recommendations, I immediately thought of ska music, as you've been doing so much of that recently. Can you tell us what you've been doing during the pandemic, according to the music?
Absolutely. Some Ske Band is an 8-member band. We've been around together for about 5 or 6 years. Been band member changes, as it always happens. But we've got an album that's already been out that came out last year. During the pandemic, it's been tough keeping the band together if we didn't love the music and love playing. So we have one band member, Darren, who comes in from Niagara Falls to practice. And we have our college student, MC, who's at Nazareth right now. So she hasn't come to the last couple practices, but all of us come together and we practice in a small little space in Parrington, and we have a great time just rehearsing and getting ready for what we know is going to be it's going to be a great 2021 for music. We've got a bunch of new songs we're writing, all in ska, all in the ska style. So we can't wait to share those with the world.
Well, it was hard for me to believe when I went back and looked at the Dryden programming that it's been nearly 10 years. Next year, it'll be 10 years since our film noir series where I brought in authors to talk about recommendations that they had. In that meantime, you have really expanded on your ska playing. How did you get into ska? What's your background there?
I went to a record store here in Rochester at Records Theater. It was in the Greasetown Mall, and there was always this hip guy behind the counter, and he was like probably 22, and I was 18, and he would always tip me to the best stuff. He's the one who turned me on to the Ramones. I came in there once in 1979, and there was a whole wall of albums like they used to do, give you that view of all the new album. It was the same album. And I said, "What is that?" And he takes one off the wall and hands it to me. And he goes, "It's the album that's going to change your life." And it was the Specials' first album. And I'm telling you, it has changed my whole life. It's not just the upbeat Jamaican ska music that gets to me. It is the message of two-tone and the message that comes through ska. Ska is from its origins in Jamaica through its revival in the 1970s and its American revival in the 1990s. And today, when it's bigger than it's ever been worldwide, ska is at its heart a inclusive, anti-racist, anti-homophobia, anti-everything bad. It has always been an inclusive style of music, and it's in the lyrics, it's in the crowds, it's in the bands, and that has appealed to me just as much as the irresistible, and it is irresistible, 2/4 beat that you get with ska. So it drew me in. I've been involved with ska ever since. And in the Army, I ran with a bunch of guys that liked the same kind of music. And so I was very honored. I took up the saxophone with the specific goal of playing in a ska band. And growing up in Rochester and realizing that the Eastman School of Music was here, if I was going to join a ska band, I was going to have to start my own, because I was never going to be as good as an Eastman student. So I started my own band about 5 or 6 years ago, brought in like-minded people, and the rest, as they say.
And so with that in mind and your history with that, I was wondering if you had any recommendations of ska movies, and we talked about a couple, but you came
Right.
back with a short film that I had never heard of. Go ahead and tell us about that.
Right. I only discovered this movie within the last year as well. It's called Beverly. It's a short film out of England. Alexander Thomas was the writer and director, and Cass Pennant, is the producer. And it's a story of England in Leicester, England in the 1980s, of a mixed race girl trying to figure out where she fits in. While there's a lot of things going on in the movie, to me, it's a movie about identity. What's it mean to be British? What's it mean to be a family member? What's it mean to be a friend? What's it mean to pick a race? Or pick a mixed race. What's it mean to like a certain style of music? So it all comes back to identity, and it has to do with this young girl whose family just moved to this, let's just say, not a welcoming neighborhood, and she tries to find her own way in the scene. She discovers people who like the same kind of music she likes, which happens to be ska, and Americans seeing this movie are going to look and say, well, it doesn't make sense, because she sees a lot of what we would call skinheads, the shaved heads and the certain type of shirts and the suspenders. Well, there's two different types of skinheads. There are the racist skinheads, which are a tiny fraction of the skinhead movement. And then there's what's known as just skinheads in the scene. And these are blacks and whites who dress this way. They came from poor working class areas of England, and it's a style of music that brought them together. That scene, even from the early years on, was infiltrated, like most scenes were, by the National Front in their attempt to get anybody to join in their racist hate. So the National Front was very good in infiltrating the progressive rock scene and every other metal scene and the ska scene. So yes, there is that element, and you do see it at one point in the movie.
I find it very interesting, and this was made just a handful of years ago. But
Right.
Along with this film, we've got films like, if I may put in a plug, White Riot, which is now playing at Virtual Cinema at the Dryden
Yep.
Theater, documentary about the Rock Against Racism movement. We've got Blinded by the Light. We've got Sing Street, which came out a couple of years ago, which really focused on this time in England, and particularly with the focus on music and how that relates and how it helps bring people out of the situation that they're in, particularly with the rise of the National Front and the opposition to that, the strong opposition from a large community of people getting together.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Rock Against Racism. TwoTone was at the heart of it. All the TwoTone bands were involved, and the same organizers who put that together were behind the TwoTone movement as well. It does seem that England was a unique place at the time, and it's difficult. We can't put ourselves in the mindset of what it was like to be growing up there. Although, sadly, there are enough parallels today where if you're an empathetic person paying any attention at all, you can watch this movie and say, yeah, I know where they're coming from. I wish it wasn't so. I wish it was a historical piece that required some extra literature to explain, well, why am I seeing people acting like that? That makes no sense. I wish it was that thing. Sadly, it's a good opportunity for us to get see the world through somebody else's eyes and see how they're affected by it.
And which is why I think there's so many pieces of art, particularly moving images, that do reflect on that time, because there are parallels with the modern day that make it much more poignant for people to watch. You mentioned two-tone, and you mentioned sort of the history of reggae. What's the difference there?
Well, to go back in time, in Jamaica in the 1950s, they were playing a lot of American music. Of course, that's what was popular. R&B stations, they would listen to that, and jazz were the two biggest sounds. They would listen to radio stations out of New Orleans, and that's where a lot of the blues and R&B were coming from. And there were also house bands at the expense of hotels in Jamaica that played jazz and kind of older swing music from the 40s, which was still popular. Of course, any indigenous people are going to start developing their own musical styles. And the people living in Jamaica started to tap into some of their traditional music. For example, mento, which was a very simple kind of sound. A lot of people hear calypso and think, confuse the two, but they're quite different. And musicians around the same time were realizing, well, Jamaica is going to be independent. We need our own style of music. They literally sat down and said, what can we do that's totally Jamaican? And they loved R&B and they loved jazz. And they wanted to bring something that was unique and different. So there's a story, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps not, that sitting around in the studio, a bunch of musicians decided to come up with the sound. And a guy named Thelonious Beckford on the piano started pounding out an R&B sounding tune, but instead of playing the beat on the 1 and the 4, the band played on the, I'm sorry, the 1 and the 3. Yeah, I'm in a band. They played on the 1 and the 3. The band played it on the 2 and the 4, and it gave this upbeat sound. So he wrote this song called Easy Snappin', and recorded it on the piano, and it was the first one to have that kind of ska feel, and it started catching on. And so while the producers in town, there were only a handful of them, were recording other music, you know, hey, this is an R&B song, and this is this kind of song, they would tell the in-house band, just give them an R&B beat, just give them a calypso beat. Well, then they started coming, just give them a ska beat. I'm like, ska beat? What's a ska beat? They said, you know, ska. Like, I don't know ska. They go, yeah, you do, you know, ska, 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 ska. They take the guitar and ska. So apparently Ernst Ragland, the guitar player, is credited with coming up the word ska. There's a lot of theories, but one of the theories is that Ernst Ragland did it when he was trying to show people it's just going upbeats, ska, ska, ska. Bob Marley started off as a ska singer. Peter Tosh, Jimmy Cliff, they were all ska singers because there was first ska. Ska started to slow down and change in the that was the early 1960s. Mid-1960s, it starts to slow down and change. There's fewer horns. The songs just get more melodic and much more romantic. That's known as the rocksteady era. And then you go to, that slows down even more. The beat changes completely to the one drop, and you get what we now call reggae. So if there was no ska, there would be no reggae. And all of your reggae early pioneers and stars, every one of them, including the late, great Toots Hibbert, all started off ska. So that's where ska came from. Jamaican immigrants leaving to go work in England brought the music with them, and their children started hearing it. So in the 1970s, when the music was, ska was definitely out of style in Jamaica, Jamaican immigrants and their children are going like, hey, look, we're going to bring this back. There's something to it. And so they brought ska back in England in the 1970s. And it caught on there for a brief period with great bands like the Specials and Selector and Madness, the English Beat, and then kind of disappeared like a lot of musical genres. It had its peak and it disappeared. Never completely went away. Came back to America where bands like the Toasters kept it alive, and underground bands like the Slackers, and always the Scatolites, the original band from Jamaica, still keeping the music alive. And it rears its head up every once in a while. In the 90s, it came back with definitely a punk attitude and came back with a ska bug sound, which a lot of your viewers might be familiar with bands like No Doubt and Real Big Fish and Rancid. And then it kind of went down again. Well, I don't believe that there's such a thing of waves in ska, but there's an awful lot of really good ska bands around the world right now, more so than at any point in its history. And the quality production is way through the roof. There's an equal mix of ska punk stuff, but a lot of ska jazz, which I'm totally into. So I'm hoping some people will check that out.
And the British reinvention then is the two-tone?
Yes, that's when the British got a hold of it in the 1970s. They created two-tone. The name implies, and you see checkerboard with two-tone all the time because that's the look, black and white together. That whole working together. The Specials were one of the very first bands, and you can see here with the black and white there, like the ska. The Specials were one of the very first bands to put black and white musicians on the stage at the same time at this period in England, which was like, whoa, okay, not done. And they also took the black and white symbol that you see here, the checkerboard, also happened to be the band that was around policemen's hats. Mm-hmm. So in a way, they were kind of stealing from who they thought was their oppressor. And so they stole the images, showed black and white working together, each unique and distinct and different, but making a pattern that really works. Almost the whole thing was the brainchild of a guy named Jerry Dammers, the keyboard player for the Specials. And very seldom in times do you have one person that can ignite a musical style, but Jerry Dammers really did it. And he launched TwoTone Records, and they had that moment, and TwoTone Records and TwoTone Sound and Jerry Dammers, Rock Against Racism, that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Jerry Dammers and TwoTone.
So as we're talking about a film and recommending Beverly, which people can actually view for free on YouTube, we talk about the music and how instrumental it is to the film. The young woman goes to find her brother at a club that's playing music. There's a crucial scene, not only inside but outside a club later in the film. So the music is there constantly as sort of the backbeat of the lives that these people are living. But I think you mentioned that this is not vintage to the era.
Yeah, I thought that was wonderful. That here's a movie that's supposed to be taking place at a specific time in the 1980s when TwoTone and those bands I mentioned were been at the peak. That's who you would have been hearing. And yet the people who made the movie chose to use movie from current ska bands. The Melbourne Ska Orchestra, a 28-piece band out of Melbourne, Australia. Dave Wakeling, he was the lead singer, or one of the two lead singers in the English Beat. He's still around, and it's called Dave Wakeling's English Beat. They have one of his songs, but they have other bands like Ruts DC and modern music. What I love about that is it shows, and the Stone Foundation, who does the title track, not a ska song, but definitely Northern Soul. What I like about that is it shows that the ideas of TwoTone aren't locked in an era. Like the music, it continues to go on. It continues to inspire and continues to motivate people to dance.
So people can go watch this film, but you and I did talk about other titles that we might talk about. Do you have more recommendations? Should people like this film or want to find out more about ska?
Well, if they want to see just a fun movie about the TwoTone era from a band's point of view, Madness produced a autobiography movie. They were like 2 years into being suddenly world famous. The oldest member in the band at that time was about maybe 24. They started when they were 17, 18 years old, and suddenly here they are. They did a movie called Take It or Leave It, which it's their story, and they played themselves. So it's, think the Hard Day's Night without the production quality. So a little something like that. But if you're more interested into the history of it, and you saw, geez, Charles, you certainly mumbled your way through that history. A couple of videos I would strongly recommend, and they're both online on YouTube, streaming for free. One, Don Letts, Letts, did he's a DJ, a musician. He was in the band Big Audio Dynamite, for those of you who are playing at home. He did a documentary called Story of Skinhead, and that was on BBC. It's an hour long, and it explains why he grew up with his head shaved, suspenders, the certain type of shirt, the certain kind of Doc Marten shoes, and why it doesn't mean racist to him. The other one on TwoTone specifically, it's in a series called Under the Influence, another BBC Channel 4 series, and it's called TwoTone Ska, Under the Influence, TwoTone Ska. And that's about a 35-minute documentary. So gets you an idea of, it shows you the places where it all took place with interviews with band members. I love it. I've seen it like 40 times.
Well, I know that Beverly is streaming on YouTube, and I know that Take It or Leave It is on YouTube. So we can seek out.
And the others are as well. I just checked this morning.
Oh, did you? Great. So
Yeah.
they're all available for a weekend full of ska-informed programming at home.
Is there any better way to spend the weekend? No, there's not.
So, Charles, before I leave you, is there anything coming up that we should know about?
Let's see. The Some Ske Band will not be having a show. We've decided to kind of wait until, well, we can have a show, and then we'll be back there. So that will be coming up in the foreseeable future. So when we're back at clubs and stuff like that, look for Some Ske Band, and also look for new music from us. That's always happening.
In the meantime, there's an album and a video that you can find online.
Sure. There was our first album came out a couple years ago. The band members have changed a bit, but the songs are the same. So amazing that didn't change. And yeah, we have several videos. We just did. We were part of the Fringe Festival. We did a pay-per-view show, which was free. So we did a show for the Fringe Festival that you can soon catch. It will be soon available on YouTube. Again, it'll be free. And it was an hour-long set of our music, all originals.
That's great. I want to thank you again for coming. I'm talking to you from the esteemed Dryden Theater in front of our brand new curtain here.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we hope to be able to open up soon and to invite not only Charles, but all of you back. So, Charles, thank you again for bringing us your knowledge.
My
and
pleasure.
Giving us this recommendation for streaming film. And we hope to see you soon.
Pick it up!